welcome back to another chess openings video. In today's video, I'm going to teach everyone how to play against the Caro-Kann defense. Before we get further on into the video, please consider subscribing to my channel and liking this video. So, without any further ado, let's get right into the video. The Caro-Kann defense opens after the move pawn to e4, pawn to c6, pawn to d4, and pawn to d5. After this, white has many options, some of which include knight to c3, pawn to e5, and e takes d5. Let's see what happens if white plays pawn to e5. Well, if pawn to e5, the main line goes as follows. Bishop to f5, and knight to f3. This may seem okay for white, and to be honest, it is. However, this line gives black a lot of counterplay with his powerful dark square bishop, and also after the moves e6, knight to d7, and knight to e7 to g6, black actually has a lot of counterplay with moves such as c5, while white is just stuck defending his e5 pawn, just like in the French defense. So, just like in the French defense, I would not recommend going for pawn to e5. Instead, after the move d5, I would recommend going for the similar idea, which I showed in the French defense, with e takes d5, going for the exchange variation. Black will continue with pawn takes d5, and you continue with knight to f3. The main line goes as follows. Knight to f6, bishop to d3. And here, black has three options. They can either go pawn to g6, bishop to g4, or pawn to e6. I'm going to be showing you what to do against all three of these. First, let's go over pawn to g6. If pawn to g6, then you continue with the moves castle, bishop to g7, bishop to f4, controlling this powerful dark square diagonal, knight to c6, knight to d2, strengthening the e4 square and also adding extra defense to your f3 knight. Castles, c3, protecting the d4 square so that your knight on f3 can move. Bishop to g4, h6, bishop to f5, bishop takes f5, pawn takes f5, and queen to e2. In this variation, the main idea for white is to try to get his knight to e5 to control the powerful outpost on e5. From e5, the knight will pretty much control many important squares in the black camp, and also it will help the queen with the attack against the black king after queen to f3 and queen to g3. This is one way to go about attacking the Caro-Kann. The game could continue with the following moves: pawn to e6, knight to e5, rook to c8, and this is how the game could continue. As you can see, white has the powerful knight on e5, and if black ever exchanges, then you only have to do pawn takes e5, leaving this powerful pawn in black's position. After the knight moves, you can infiltrate with queen to f3 or with queen to h5 right away. Also, another possibility could be that the knight could go to f3, strengthening the e5 square. This is what to do in case black plays pawn to g6. However, what if black doesn't play pawn to g6? What if he goes for, let's say, bishop to g4? Well, in this case, the idea is very similar. After bishop to f4, again controlling this powerful diagonal, knight to c6, pawn to c3, protecting the d4 pawn, as black was threatening to capture because the knight is pinned to the queen. Pawn to e6, castle, and bishop to d6. Something to remember in the Caro-Kann is that after bishop to f4, if black ever moves his bishop to d6, the best move is, most of the time, is to just capture the powerful bishop on d6, as you don't want your bishop on f4 to ever be a liability. Also, it does not make sense moving your bishop back to g3, as that simply wastes the tempo because black can always just capture your bishop. So bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, and knight to d2, strengthening the pinned knight. After, let's say, black castles, you go rook to e1 with the same idea of moving your queen, let's say to b3, and putting your knight on the powerful e5 square. Rook to c8, queen to b3, queen to c7, defending the b7 pawn, h3, bishop to f4, captures, rook to d8. Now, this is just one way that the game could continue. However, let's say black plays a move such as a6. In this case, what you do is you could simply attack. There's two things that white could do. Either he could try to go for the e5 square with his knight, or he could maneuver his knight to f1, and then to e3 to go after the d5 pawn, with moves such as c4 and knight to e3. So those are some possible plans for white in this position, to try to control the center. So that's what happens if after bishop to d3, they play bishop to g4. Now let's go over what is probably the most common move that I have seen personally in my games from clueless opponents when they play pawn to e6. In this position, after pawn to e6, you should be thinking that you already won the game, because pawn to e6 is actually a mistake. After the move, bishop to f4, as you can see, the bishop controls the powerful diagonal, and also, after e6, black has essentially just locked their light square bishop out of play the entire game. Let's say black continues with knight to c6, you castle, and they play bishop to d6, challenging your powerful light square bishop. Just like before, you exchange and play pawn to c3, protecting the d4 square. After this, black will castle, and you play queen to e2, with the same idea as in the g6 variation, with the idea of knight to e5. And this idea is actually unstoppable. After a move such as b6, black is desperate to get their bishop into the game with the moves such as bishop to b7. However, just like before, you play knight to e5, and that knight is as solid as it can possibly be on e5. It's impossible for black to ever take the knight, because if they take, then simply pawn takes e5, and this forks the queen and the knight. And after the queen moves, let's say to e7, you simply grab the knight, and after queen takes f6, you are up an entire knight for a pawn. So since black can't actually recapture the e5 pawn, their next best move is to continue on with their plan to try to make their bishop active with bishop to b7. After which, you play knight to d2 with the idea of bringing your knight to f3 to further strengthen the e5 square. And in this position, black will probably realize that it's best to just move their queen away to threaten capturing on e5, as now if knight captures e5 and pawn captures e5, there's no fork on the queen and knight. After this, you simply play f4, and if knight takes e5, then you take back with your f pawn. And as you can see, white has this dominating pawn structure pointing towards the black king. After the knight moves, let's say to e7, white has already won. This is because after moves such as queen to h5 or doing a rook lift with rook to f3 to g3 and bringing your other rook into the game, white will have a powerful attack against the black king, which black can do nothing against. This is because, as you can see, this pawn structure is blocking out all of white's pieces. The bishop on b7, the knight on d7, and the queen on e7. None of these pieces can come to the king's side to help out with the defense, which leaves the king very vulnerable. And also with the semi-open f-file that white has complete control of, white can easily win this game. Okay, so now you might be thinking, oops, sorry, I already showed you guys that. Okay, so as you can see, in this position, white is actually completely winning. So, this is actually how you're supposed to play against the Caro-Kann defense. After you exchange and play bishop to d3, no matter what black does, whether it be g6, bishop to g4, or pawn to e6, white will always be slightly better or even completely winning. Other than that, I hope you guys learned something new, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, like before, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and drop a like on the video if you don't mind. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice day.